You're listening to episode 177, Kimberly's story, cord prolapse and emergent C-section at 26 weeks. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Hello, my friends. I am so excited to share my interview with Kimberly Reyes here. If you have ever spent time in the NICU as a parent or a clinician, you have felt firsthand the feeling of helplessness and overwhelm in all parts of your journey. One of the things I picked up on with Kimberly during our conversation was that there's a true art to unravel the balance of parental advocacy and participation in the NICU and telling the providers exactly what you need. So during this interview, Kimberly had to, as she says, start advocating the second she woke up after surgery. And it's a great lesson in sometimes you have to run before you know how to crawl, especially when it's at the well-being of your child. So I'm so grateful for the perspective and the lens that Kimberly brought to this episode as a mom, as a NICU advocate, as a Black mother, as a writer, as a lifelong learner. I'm so grateful that you are here, Kimberly, and I can't wait to share this episode with you.
So my name is Kimberly Reyes, and I am a mother to a newly 3-year-old. So we hit 3 2 weeks ago. Quite the journey. And so I live in Western Montana now, in the mountains in rural Western Montana, although we are originally from New York City. So it has been
quite different.
quite the culture adjustment, but in all intentionality. And so I've got a kid that loves tractor pulls and skipping rocks in the river, and it is just a different life. That same child was born at 26 weeks, weighing 1 pound, 8 ounces, and she spent 109 days in the NICU before she came home. And so that has shaped our parenthood and shaped our journey. And that's kind of a little bit about who I am and we are.
Wow. I have so many questions for you. And one is just to kind of give the listeners an idea is that you and I connected on LinkedIn, and I was immediately drawn to your ability. I don't know. It's such a mix of, I would say, like creative writing is your style. Like you speak to people, like I can hear your voice through your words. I don't know what that's called. But just immediately gravitated to who you are, what you were willing to speak about, and the courage that it takes to speak about your own personal experiences and move into a professional vision. So I'm excited to get to what you're doing now and how you're advocating for yourself and for other families.
Sure.
But walk us through kind of just back at the beginning and, finding out that you were pregnant. And was there any clue that you were going to have a preterm birth, or was it a surprise?
Well, it's one of those things that actually, having done more research, I wish I knew what I knew then now, actually. So I guess I'll preface it. So it's interesting that you say the style in which I explain. I'll preface also that I was a teacher for 15 years before my daughter was born.
There
And
it is.
so, yeah. So, we are used to standing in front of groups of people, talking about yourself, because if you aren't personally involved in what you're doing, kids tune out, adults tune out. And so that's, I think, a part of just the comfort with generally just talking to people. It's something I did 6 hours a day, every day for
Hmm.
15 years. Well, I guess so. When I was first pregnant, which I guess was the fall of 2019, at about 9 weeks, I had something called an SCH, which is a subchronic hematoma. And at the time, actually thought it was a miscarriage. Turned out it was just a bleed. Went to the hospital and an emergency room experience, which I could, that's a much longer story for a different day. But already started to, in that experience itself, feeling some of that not being heard, not being seen, not being
Mm.
taken care of. And so fast forward to them saying everything will be fine. Had to find a new doctor because the gynecologist at the time wasn't an OB. So it was just, okay, you're pregnant, but you have to go see someone else. And so this was the first of 4 different providers I would actually have over the course of being pregnant. Much more than 4, because if anyone's been in the hospital, you know that you see a new doctor every 72 hours. But
Yes.
yeah. So,
As far as families are concerned, there's not a staffing shortage because there's so many new faces every day.
and I was in one of the nation's premier teaching hospitals. So I
Wow.
will tell you just the size of the staff and the turnover.
Oh
And yeah, so,
gosh.
but anyways, I was told that I was put on bed rest for a week. And then I was told that once it sort of resolved itself, everything would be fine. Further research, as a researcher and diving deep into medical journals myself, turns out had I maybe been on bed rest, things might have been different, because I really should not have gone back to the stress of teaching elementary school, being on my
Mm.
feet all day, being yelled at by parents, all of the different things that,
Yeah.
one deals with. But fast forward, so, we were told at around 20 weeks, everything was fine, that, the original issue had cleared. She was developing well, all of the sort of, okay, we're in the clear now moments. Somewhere around then, I was actually fired by that OB. That's a thing that can happen. So
Mm.
people are always like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, no, they'll hand you your file in the lobby and tell you, it's been fun, but we're not gonna
Mm.
continue to do this. So at
Wow.
which point, frantically searching halfway through my pregnancy for another provider, I ended up going the midwife route and found for the first time someone who wanted to listen to the story and wanted to
Wow.
respect our wishes. And my husband and I left the appointment both looking at each other and saying, did someone just tell us that this is our kid and we have a voice?
Yeah.
Because
Wow.
that was refreshing and huge. But that would last for about 2 weeks. And in about 23 weeks, I was pre-prom and my water broke and I went in the hospital, and all
Mm.
hopes of anything being
Mm.
not medicalized and natural and with wishes as I'd like went out the proverbial window. And so at the time when I was admitted, my daughter weighed only about 480 grams, I think they said, and was still a week under what they call viability. So I was told if she were to come at that time, there would have been nothing they could do. And my job was to stay pregnant as long as humanly possible and
Yeah.
get her weight up. So I proceeded to lie there in the hospital and eat balls of buffalo mozzarella and a couple of other very, sort of high edible fat things. And she came at 26 weeks and 4 days, weighing 680 grams. So she had gained those 200
What?
grams.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. It is not easy to be on bed rest.
No. And, even the coat I wore into the hospital, I couldn't wear home. So I
Wow.
also
Oh my God. That is hilarious.
participated in said weight gain. But, she was, yeah. So
Can you eat buffalo mozzarella anymore, or is it take you back to that time?
Well, I live in now what we call a food desert. So if I could get good Italian deli, I also spent 2 years living in Italy, so I'm a little bit spoiled with the whole
Yeah.
situation. But if I could get really good cheese, I would probably eat it till the end of time still to this
Okay.
day.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah. Well, and also just cold cuts in general, which most people avoid when they're pregnant. And so
Yeah, it's
the day that
true.
my daughter actually did come, my mom still tells the story of getting a call from my husband who we had still wanted to encapsulate the placenta at that time. And
Hmm.
so I go into, I don't even think you could call it labor because I had a cord prolapse. So the cord delivered before the baby.
Right.
7 minutes later, crash C-section, she was out. So it's, one could call it labor. I don't really know. But anyways, my mom gets this frantic call from my husband and he goes, I need a cooler and some Genoa salami. And my mom goes, what? It's your husband talking
For
about
the
you
baby.
making absolutely no sense. It would later, months later, be clarified that the cooler was for the placenta, which actually couldn't be saved because it had turned necrotic, which nobody had figured out. And
Oh.
the salami was for me to have a sandwich finally after I woke up from
Oh
surgery.
my goodness, Kimberly. Did she
But yeah,
deliver on both of those?
I don't think she brought the cooler because in the end of the day, she had no idea what he was talking about. And she goes, there's a fridge in her room. So I'm just gonna,
I just,
ignore this part.
oh my
And,
gosh.
they came to the hospital and she would bring me a whole spread of cold cuts probably a week later when I first came home from the hospital and they
Mm.
were fresh from an Italian deli and delicious. But nonetheless, so my daughter comes at 26 weeks, weighing a pound and a half, and we begin this NICU journey in,
Yeah.
and also simultaneously the day that she's born, New York locks down for COVID. So
Okay.
yeah. So a series of, you know, events that conflate into the perfect storm of a situation where my husband and I were never allowed in the NICU together. And so she was 108 days old
Yeah.
before we were ever together as a family.
My heart breaks for you for so many reasons. I was a child life specialist in the NICU during the pandemic and got to see firsthand what that was like for parents. And I I'm I can only hope one day that I maybe you are writing a book or that you will produce something in addition to these podcasts because your written word about that experience is so important, especially with your talents of being able to communicate. Can you talk to me about you talk a lot about advocating for yourself, for your daughter. What did that look like at the beginning? And were you the best advocate right after she was born? Is it a role you grew into? Like, talk to me about that process of becoming a NICU mom.
Sure, yeah. So I'm gonna say me yelling for her best interests began the second I woke up from surgery. And
Mm,
so I was set in recovery. And one of the things that I think NICU parents will tell you is you try to hold on to the slightest bit of control because it is a situation where all control over your own body, the process, your child, everything is kind of taken away from you. And that's something that I really think is very important for staff to consider, right? So that, I wake up from, emergency crash C-section where the last thing I remember is being wheeled through a labor and delivery ward on my knees with a doctor behind me holding the cord in. Like, so this level of
gosh.
just, you know, insanity of the whole thing. Me telling the anesthesiologist, "Oh, well, can I move my arm here to help you out? Because I'm trying to help you out. Because me panicking, I know, is not going to help. So how do I help?" And he goes, "Well, actually, you can hold it there." And so I said, "Okay, let's, do this together because we're all, here for the same thing."
You're like, your success is my success. So
Right.
let's
Yeah.
do
So
this
like
together.
let's, teamwork is dream work here, people. So nonetheless, I wake up and I know that at that moment I'm producing colostrum. I'm producing the most nutritious thing humanly possible for a child who's come early, and this is what she needs. And so I say to the nurse, "Okay, I need a receptacle to hand express this colostrum. and somehow somebody gets it to her. Oh no, you rest. Don't worry about it. It's okay. No, I'm not going to rest. You need to do this.
Mm.
Said nurse leaves. Next person comes along. May or may not have been an orderly, someone who had no inclination. You need to get me a cup for this colostrum. Okay, I'll get a nurse.
Yeah.
You do that. So I think it was probably, 3 or 4 different people, me insisting in, one can say not the least, I'm not the most polite person if you've decided not to respect my wishes. So saying, this is what's going to happen. And I was able to, after, insistence, which I think many people wouldn't feel the agency to do at that moment, right?
Yeah.
Express the colostrum. My husband was able to take it downstairs and give it to her by mouth with a swab.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's incredible.
But I think about in that moment of just having to insist so deeply and, my own conviction, my own sense of saying, no, this is what I want for her.
Yeah.
And, if I'm walking down there myself, I'm about to get out of this bed and do it. So someone needs to make it happen. But I think it shouldn't be that hard, right?
Yeah. It's a really, I can't say for certain. I don't spend time with mothers right after they give birth. We typically see them once they get to the NICU. The picture that is painted for me is a parent who is scared, who is fearful, and every instinct is telling them, my baby should be with me right now, and they're not. So how can we, care teams, care providers, look at those little spots? Well, for you, it's colostrum. For other people, it's making sure dad is there. For somebody else, it's, getting me off this pain medicine as soon as possible. Whatever it is, that question should really be before the emergency, before the C-section, before the birth, to say, what is most important to you? I'm working with a hospital right now, and they have this great line. It's called What Matters Most. And it's like, we take all of the medical stuff out of the way, but what matters most to you and your family right now, we're going to prioritize that. And we're going to put it in the chart. That's happening at a Nova Children's right now. And I think that's so powerful. And all it would have taken is one of these people to look at you and say, what matters most to you right now? I'm going to listen. I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's mind-blowingly amazing, first of all, to hear that someone is thinking in that realm, because I think, well, one of the issues, and so I'll go back to the idea of the size of the hospital I was in and the size of the NICU and the fact that you're talking about, one of the nation's premier teaching hospitals, so that there is, on average, I think, if I do some quick math, 50, 60, 70 babies in the NICU. I mean, you're not talking about a small operation. And so, and even the antepartum end of it. So when you deal with, maternal fetal medicine, before you give birth, was a constant rotation. I was there so long that I saw the rotation like come back twice. And I'm like, oh, hey, I haven't seen you in a month. Oh, nice to, but nonetheless, I think it's a moment where that's that bit of humanity, because that's really what it is. You're talking about humanity, right? You're talking about having the most human aspect of what a family needs being taken into consideration, right? And I'll give you an example of another thing. So when my daughter was, I don't know, probably a few days old, the umbilical cord, the stub of the umbilical cord was still attached. And I come from a tradition where when that falls off, you put it in a little wax paper and it goes in the baby book. And mine 40 years later is still set in a baby book. That's a thing. And so I had left explicit instructions with anyone who would listen. When it falls off, please save it. Please, the nurse, the person changing linens, anybody who would listen for that first, 3 or 4 days. And if my husband went in the morning when I didn't go, I said, make sure you tell them that this is, what's going to happen. I show up, must have been day 4 or 5. it's gone. It's fallen off. I noticed not because I was able to change her diaper, but because I was there for cares and someone else was handling my child when I had never even held her, right? And I said, "Well, where's the umbilical cord?" And, I started to cry. At that point, I lost it because I said, I only asked for one thing, guys. This is in the general scheme of things. And, the nurse just looks at me and she goes, "Oh, well, it must have just fallen off in, a diaper change and things happen," and walks away.
No.
Yeah. And I remember, telling anyone who would hear, and each person that I spoke to it was met with the same sterility and lack of things. And I don't think until there were, tears falling down my face that the one woman looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "Well, what does sorry do here? What does this change? This is gone forever, this moment." And the fact that not only were the wishes not even respected, but, there was such a flippancy with which the response was given as well. Needless to say, anything else that I had in the future, I stuck giant signs to the incubator, and I had our amazing child life specialist at the hospital who helped me. She's like, "I can laminate those for you." I was like, "Let's do it." And so there are pictures of my daughter's incubator with giant signs laminated with bright colors of every little thing that we wanted someone to know, so that if you walked over there, there was really going to be no way you were going to miss our
Kimberly,
wishes.
I love a good sign. I'm not surprised that you did this. I'm so glad you did that because gosh, every family who comes into the hospital, okay, hear me out for just a quick second. We're going to dream, is given 10 pieces of cardstock and a big ass Sharpie. And it's like, the things you want, please put on the door, that your wishes, your this and that. Like, oh goodness. My heart is breaking for your umbilical cord. I haven't had a family ask for that. And my mom has my umbilical cord and wax paper in my baby book. Oh, I'm sorry
Yeah.
that you were met with that. I'm sorry that somebody was too scared to look at you and say, "I'm so sorry. I cannot believe we've overlooked this. I know where the trash is. I know where we put the baby diapers. I'm going to go in and look," and oh, you deserve that.
Something, and I think it was at a point where they were at some level glad to see us go, because I started telling other moms, I'm like, "Hey, do you have a sign?"
Mm.
Like, can everybody have a sign? Do you want
Love
that?
it.
Just even
Yeah.
things like, them putting the first outfit on a baby, because if anyone has been a NICU
Yeah.
parent, you know that they don't wear clothes for a long time. And so when you finally get to wear clothes, right, it's a big deal. And
It's
so
a big deal.
I said, "Do not put that first outfit on her without me here. I will be the
Yes.
one to do this," right? And so just another thing that went on the sign. And
Did
so
that happen? And were your wishes met for that?
I was able to, so I came in one day and she was wearing like I don't know if you ever, it kind of looks like almost like a karate gi. It's like the white robe that they put on the baby that has sort of two flaps and it ties around the waist, and it's like the
Yeah.
baby version of a hospital thing. So I came in one morning and she's wearing one of those, and I'm like, "What is this?" This looks like clothes. And so, had a moment about it, and they said, "Oh, well, we just put this on." I said, "Oh, well, that's technically clothes. Shall we like have a debate about what is really clothes or not? Because like we can play semantics. I'm a linguist. Let's not do this."
Sure.
But yeah, so the actual clothes that a relative of us had sent us an entire like trousseau of preemie stuff. So according to the staff, she was the most fashionable NICU baby they'd ever seen, with just this ridiculous series of pajama after pajama. And so the actual outfit that was bought for her, I did eventually get to, put
Mm.
on her for the first time.
It's these tiny touches that make you mom that we have to hold on to and celebrate. and gosh, I wish I was a linguist right now because I lose words. Facilitate for parents to have those moments.
I think
Putting on the
deeper,
first outfit. Go ahead.
yeah, I think deeper than that, not only facilitate them, but be cognizant of the fact that that should never have had to be the case in the first place,
Yeah.
right? So I think there's a disconnect because it seems to be in an attempt to be such good caregivers, right? And I've got, love to the end of time for the NICU staff and for the people that did literally keep her alive. That's not the point. But to understand what it means for a parent that all of that agency has been taken away. So that for someone to have to facilitate me holding her for the first time, which by the way didn't happen until she was 57 days old, and me to wait that morning for a nurse to flippantly say, okay, well, she's been extubated, but you still have to wait 2 hours because it's not care time. And I almost lost it. Right? I said,
Yeah.
what do you mean? I'm sitting here. We've been waiting until today was the day. Like this is holding day. Like, what are we, And so really to deeply understand what it means psychologically for a parent to not be able to make those decisions, to not be able to pick up a child when they want, to not be able to nurse, to not be able to decide how much and at what time and by whom they're being fed, right? All of these things that are normally a given, right? As the parent. And so not even saying how do we facilitate it, but recognize what it means that you as the staff and the provider and the whatever position you hold now have to facilitate something for someone that it should just be that person doing it.
That's really important. I think you're right. I know you're right.
It's a recognition. And I think that's when we talk about sort of the deepest levels of sympathy and in some cases empathy. Empathy is hard because you have to have experienced it in order to understand, right? Sympathy is a bit easier because you can say, I understand how you feel, as opposed to saying, I know how you feel, right? And so, but just recognizing, the grief and what I love in a lot of the NICU community is we talk about different things about grief. Grief is not just the loss. Grief is also looking at the loss of experience. And so understanding that parents with a child in the hospital are grieving so many things, and chief amongst which is they're grieving normalcy. They're grieving having that picture perfect birth and holding the child after you birth it. And, the Pampers commercial we've all seen, which I still can't really handle, kind of brings tears to my eyes because I'm just like, that never happened. And understanding what it really means to be dealing with a family that's grieving the loss of expectation, the loss of normalcy, the loss of a joyous experience surrounding the birth of a child.
Kimberly, what has helped you the most since having this very transformative experience of being thrust into the medical setting with you, not just you, but you and your baby, your husband? But when we strip away the educator part of you, the historian part of you, what has helped the most for you in yourself, your personal journey through all of this?
I think finding community, finding that understanding that I'm not the only person who feels this way. And so there's, in the course of doing the podcast, in the course of doing the research I've done, I've connected with a lot of parents all over the world. I had a great email exchange with someone in Australia this morning, and we're trying to figure out a time for a phone call, and we're like, 16 hours is a crazy time.
It is a crazy time.
And I told her, I was like, I deeply understand. I spent 5 years living in Tokyo, so trying to talk to anybody in the States was always, a challenge. But, just reading a post where a mom is like, I cried because someone sent me a baby shower invitation today.
Mm,
And you sat there and you're just like, it's not just me.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that sense of it's not just me, because it is, in the best of circumstances, so easy to feel isolated. But given the way that all circumstances have been exacerbated in the last few years, it was actually deeply isolating, right? It wasn't actually just feeling isolated. You in fact were isolated, right?
Yeah.
And for many parents, still the same, right? For children with medically complex, for parents with medically complex children, right? This is a reality that so many of the normal milestones, so many of, the moments in life happen in isolation and happen in this sense that I'm the only one going through this right now and at this time. And knowing that not to be true has been comforting, empowering, and also a motivation to make sure that the next person feels that way too, right?
It's so beautifully said. And I'm grateful that you're doing what you're doing now and sharing what you've been through. Where can people listen to your podcast, hear more from you, connect from you, and what kind of people do you want tuning in and following along with what you're doing?
So we have a website. So the umbrella organization of everything we do is called All the Unexpected. And
Mm, I love that.
it came from a play on the what to expect, right? Because
Mm.
when you're expecting a child, they tell you, and I sat there with the app too, and I'm going, oh, we're a grapefruit today. Okay, and so doing all of these things, right? And so, but what happens when it's unexpected? What happens when the baby comes early? What happens when there's a speech delay? What happens when you are medically complex as a preschooler, right? What happens in all these different times? And so it is for every parent, family, and I say, and anyone who has, a tiny human in their life, right? So it's because we discuss the range of issues. And so if you go to all the unexpected, which is one word, .com, that is the hub. There is links to the podcast there, to articles. We've produced 2 short documentaries this year talking specifically about Black maternal health and the maternal mortality crisis, which is deeply rooted in history. So as a historian, I've spoken about how we got here. And I think how we got here is a very important way to make change for the future, because if you don't understand how you've gotten somewhere, how do you move forward, right?
Mm,
Um,
absolutely.
we also have recipes for healthy living, because I think nutrition is such a huge part of it, especially if you're talking about preterm birth. Their gut flora, their stomachs are incredibly, for lack of a better word, abused by the
Mm,
earliest parts of their lives. And so how do we nourish children, not only physically, but mentally and spiritually? So we talk
mm,
about parenting. Gentle parenting is a huge part of what we discuss. How do we evaluate our own emotions and our own emotional connections to children, and sort of the things that they trigger in ourselves, and kind of healing? And so it's really about healing as a family, right? As a unit, as a larger community, right? So like I said, anyone who interacts with the children. So yeah, alltheunexpected.com, and also on all your friendly socials. So on,
mm.
Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Discord, any of it, all of we're
All the
all
unexpected on all of the things. And I love it.
yeah. And so that's where you can find us. I get comments and things from parents, and it's wonderful to hear from people all around the world. So we've got podcast listeners in 64 countries right now.
That's
And
amazing.
I get, emails. I got an email from a mom in Nigeria saying, I heard my story in what you were talking about. And
Whoa.
so just I love to hear from people. Have no problem answering like questions or resources. And I find myself, people will send me, hey, where can I find something about this? And I'm like, hold on. And I'll send you an email with, 10 links. And so very much, in the process of making sure that people have the resources they need and feel heard and feel seen.
Well,
And
there's no
so,
doubt you're doing that. And I'm so grateful that you came on Child Life on Call with
well,
me.
thank you for
And
having me.
yeah, oh my goodness, I would love to have you again at any time. So I hope that you do come back and continue to help us understand more about your experience, what you're advocating for, and so we can all continue to grow, feel less alone, and the healthcare professionals that listen to this can feel more connected and more empowered to do more to really, like you said, not just facilitate, but deeply respect and understand that the way of the world for which it quote unquote was supposed to happen is now turned around. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you do. I think
Mm,
families are probably touched every day.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for listening to Child Life on Call. If you head to our website, childlifeoncall.com, you're going to find all sorts of stuff there for parents, professionals, healthcare providers, child life specialists, no matter who you are. Actually, when you just go to our homepage, it'll help you direct to exactly where you need to go. On that, you'll find opportunities and PDUs for child life specialists. Parents, we've got a starter kit for you. And clinicians, we even have a clinician course, which teaches you how to be a confident and capable caregiver in pediatrics. We're so grateful that you're here. Please DM us on Instagram. And like I mentioned, when you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.